Switzerland is probably one of the greatest synonyms for neutrality. Primarily due to its positioning during the two world wars and the Cold War, Swiss neutrality became world famous. But how did Switzerland come to be neutral, and how was it able to maintain this status despite major turmoil and wars in Europe? The first steps towards neutrality were taken as early as 1515, the year in which the Swiss Confederation suffered a devastating loss against the French. As a result, the Confederation stopped its expansionist policy and tried to stay largely out of all conflicts in the future. However, this did not mean that the Swiss stopped fighting. Because of their fighting spirit, the Swiss were known throughout Europe, and many institutions and royal houses hired them as mercenaries. The most famous mercenary force is probably the Swiss Guard of the Pope in Rome, which is still in service today. Swiss troops thus fought primarily as mercenaries, but the state tried to stay out of the wars of its European neighbors to a large extent. But the neutrality of Switzerland as we know it today developed only with the Napoleonic Wars. Despite signing several peace treaties with the French, Switzerland was invaded by France in 1798 and later became a vassal state of Napoleon Bonaparte. It was only after Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo that this status was ended and the future status of Switzerland was negotiated at the Congress of Vienna in 1814 and 15. In the meantime, a neutral Switzerland appeared to be the most sensible solution for all the great powers involved. This was mainly because each great power had its own plans for the future of Switzerland, and thus no meaningful agreement was possible. Austria, for example, would have liked to rule Switzerland as a satellite state, France wanted to keep its vassal, and Prussia wanted to integrate Switzerland into the German Confederation. So in the end, as a compromise, a neutral Switzerland was decided as a buffer zone between the great powers. This was also very convenient for the Swiss inhabitants, to whom neutrality seemed to be the best means against the expansionist plans of their neighbors. In the future, however, this neutrality was repeatedly put to the test. For example, during the First World War. Even though it was threatened from all sides, it managed to remain strictly neutral, so it did not participate in any military actions before, during or after the war, nor did it take sides with any of the warring parties. Nevertheless, the country mobilized its army on the borders in case a neighbor invaded the country. In the process, both sides had developed plans to invade enemy territory through Switzerland. The French army developed a plan to invade southern Germany through Switzerland, and the German General Staff also originally developed a plan in which they wanted to march into France via Switzerland instead of via Belgium. However, both plans were rejected. This is why Switzerland was able to stay out of the war. After the war, the newly founded League of Nations also officially recognized Swiss neutrality, which is why the headquarters of the League of Nations was also established in Geneva. The United Nations, as the successor of the League of Nations, still has its headquarters in Geneva today, along with New York. The greatest challenge, however, came during the Second World War. Again, despite its strategic location, Switzerland managed to remain neutrality to a large extent. Especially after the annexation of Austria, Switzerland feared being incorporated into the German Reich as well. Therefore, the Swiss government ordered general mobilization and border troops were stationed. At times, the country was completely surrounded by Axis forces, and the Germans repeatedly violated Swiss airspace and sent saboteurs, but an invasion did not occur. After the end of the war, the victorious powers accused Switzerland of economic cooperation with the Nazis, as many transactions of the German Reichsbank were conducted through the Swiss banking system, and trade with the German Reich continued. After World War II, Switzerland took a more active position in international affairs. It continues to promote humanitarian initiatives and often acts as a mediator, but it remains strictly neutral on military matters. For example, it has also not joined NATO or the EU. Another important reason for Swiss neutrality is that it is one of the foundations of national identity. This is not based on ethnicity, religion or language as in most other countries. It has 4 official languages, for example, but on intercultural factors. Thus, the belief in direct democracy, the willingness to compromise, and also neutrality offer important cornerstones of the Swiss national understanding. Thus, the small Alpine state has been pursuing a policy of neutrality for several centuries now. But it is not the only neutral country in the world. Ireland and Costa Rica, for example, pursue the same foreign policy, and also the neighbor Austria strives, albeit forces since World War II, a neutral stance.